we in America sort of confer respectability and maybe even exceptionalism on people who appear to be wealthy. We tend to think if you're rich, you must be good at whatever you say you're good at. And Donald Trump has benefited from that, I think, more than anybody else in his lifetime. And really, it's had great consequences for our country.
Donald Trump often emphasizes his great business acumen, framing his life as a triumphant rise from modest beginnings. My father gave me a very small loan in 1975, he has said, and I built it into a company that's worth many, many billions of dollars with some of the greatest assets in the world. And I say that only because that's the kind of thinking that our country needs. That's Donald Trump's words, not mine. But Russ Buettner and Susanne Craig of the New York Times have been investigating Trump's finances since he first ran for the White House. Indeed, their work has won them a Pulitzer Prize back in 2019. Now, in their book Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success, they report on failures and deceptions which belie the attributes many Trump supporters still imbue in their man: wealth, status and business ability. Russ and Susanne, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. Very early morning, I imagine, where you are?
A little bit.
Not too early, not too early.
Well, thank you very much for getting up for us. Before we dig into the contents of your book, give us an overview what the state is of Donald Trump's business empire right now.
Well, we don't know the exact state at any particular point in time. We know what the trend lines have been for several years, and they're not good. The thing that had been supporting much of his businesses was tens of millions of dollars a year from The Apprentice, a television show of which he was the host for years, and licensing deals that came from that. And that was supporting up some businesses that were losing money. All the Apprentice money's gone. Obviously, the licensing has really dried up, and he's now facing court judgments of close to $500 million that, if that withstands appeal, could really pose an existential threat to him.
Sorry, go on, Susanne.
Well, I was going to say, and it's interesting, since he's left the White House, he's also gone into a number of sort of kind of curious, maybe is the best word for them, businesses. He's hawking sneakers with his name on them. He's got Bibles that he's selling. And those are licensing deals where he puts his name on them and he gets a one-time fee. But we're also seeing him go into those kind of areas. And that's never going to compensate for the money that he lost from things like The Apprentice and that. But he's definitely made a move into that kind of thing and hoping of getting those sort of one-time checks.
You'd have to sell a lot of merch, wouldn't you, to make that same amount of money? It's a lot of caps and Bibles. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, your book says that Donald Trump started with a fairly sizable chunk of cash from his father. Why does he try and downplay the help that he gave him initially? And to what extent was all of his wealth always actually really just his father's?
I think, when I think about that, I think there's sort of a top line thing there. By making his father look smaller, it makes him look bigger. But it really is it's so curious. Every time I hear it, I'm just like, why don't you just give the guy some credit? Just say he was great and I inherited some money from him, but Donald Trump just can't do it. He just clings to that hard scrabble story. And I think part of it is, it's a great story. You're up from nothing and you built this, he thinks, he calls it $1 billion empire. And that's the story that he wants. And he wants to be able to say that's the sort of know-how that Americans need. He's been saying that story long before he got into the White House, but it certainly became his calling card once he ran for office, that he did it all by himself and didn't really need the help. And over his life, he's not only just sort of made his father look smaller, he's appropriated his wealth early on, and then he's just diminished him throughout his life. It's incredible. He's a small-time builder. He gave me $1 million loan. But I think it really does come down to the idea that he wants this hard scrabble story, that he's up from nothing, and that's the sort of, business genius that Americans need.
Do you think he's repeated that narrative so often, Susanne, that he now even believes it himself?
I do. I really do. I think he's clung to it for so long. He thinks that that's how it happened. I definitely do.
Yeah. Russ, I understand that you had quite a lot of access to never before seen records and documents. What was the most helpful to you and what was the most revelatory in putting this book together?
Well, there were two big pots of documents we obtained for our prior reporting at the Times. One was decades of Fred Trump, the father's financial records, where we could see all the money that funneled to Donald and the various ways the father invented to get that money to his children, especially to Donald, outside of the tax system. Another huge bucket was Donald Trump's tax returns for about 20 years, which allowed us for the first time to see which businesses were making money, which businesses were losing money. And then in the course of reporting this book, we also obtained financial records from The Apprentice, from the show itself. So we could see how much money that show was generating. And that was really important because the thing that made Donald Trump the richest during those years was that to get him to sign the show, that producer, Mark Burnett, offered him half of the product integration money. And that was a tremendous amount of money in this case because the show was entirely based around product integration. Each episode featured one product. And when they started, the sponsors weren't paying much. By the time they finished, sponsors were paying $2, $3, $4 million for an episode, and Donald Trump was taking half of that. That's the thing that really reinvigorated his finances after years.
Well, so it wasn't just the contract, it was all the sort of deals that flowed from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Very much. That was the heart of it. Yes, right.
Yeah. To what extent would you both say that this perception, I mean, created by him and amplified by him himself, of him as a successful businessman is the reason that US voters trust him more with the economy than perhaps other candidates?
I think it underlies it all. And it's interesting because before Donald Trump had The Apprentice, Gallup polls showed that Americans really didn't view him that favorably. That switched afterwards. And today, when you talk to voters, that show still resonates. Mark Burnett and his editors, incredibly skilled editors and editing bays, took Donald Trump and made him a measured, thoughtful businessman. It's not the businessman that Russ and I got to know during our reporting. You know, he was very unpredictable. He would lose money. I could go on and on about that, but Mark Burnett really took him and made him out to something on TV that he wasn't. And so many people saw that show. And the intro where it's, meet the billionaire and the introduction of the show. And he just looks so wealthy. And that introduction, that show repeated over and over into American homes every week. And millions of people watched it and people came to believe it. And it stuck today. It was so powerful. It's still there.
Yeah. You also say in the book that the media, in the early days, at least, of The Apprentice, were very complicit in this kind of idea and fed Trump's false narrative. In what ways did that happen?
Well, that really dates back to the 1970s. Part of the difficulty, the challenge of reporting on Donald Trump is that it's a very small, privately held family business that he is involved in. And he spent his whole career there. Unlike a public corporation, they don't answer to anyone. So there really is no way to reality check the claims he made. And from a very young age, he started saying that all of his father's wealth was his. He claimed that he had taken over the company when he had not. And then he started claiming that the things that he had built after one or two projects were worth far more than they actually were, just to get on the Forbes list of the wealthiest Americans. And that continued for years, and there was really no way to check it. But during that era, he also really benefited from a kind of renewed interest in America in the 1980s, a renewed focus on the lives of wealthy people. There was a show hosted by Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. They loved to have Donald on because he would open up his life to them. Most rich people would not. And he had all the accoutrements of wealth. He had a helicopter, he had a fancy apartment that was shiny, and it looked like he was rich. And that's all you really needed then to sort of be declared rich. And so from the mid 1980s, like actually 60 Minutes, a very esteemed show here, said he was a billionaire in 1985. It wasn't really supportable, but Donald had told them that. And so they repeated it. And that just cycled and escalated for years. And then The Apprentice really picked up the ball and gave that a whole new sort of magnification.
And validation. Russ, you mentioned before about some of the charges that they're facing. That in 2022, the Trump Organization was found guilty of criminal tax fraud for avoiding payroll taxes. Remind us what the potential consequences of that might be.
I'm going to let Sue talk about that. She followed those really closely.
Okay.
Yeah, in that case, and that was 2022, there was actually a fairly small fine, and it was $1 million, $2 million. So that one actually, I think, well, reputationally wasn't positive for them. The fine wasn't huge, but since then he's faced, and there's been civil trials, and that one is significant. The New York Attorney General brought it, and it was over valuations of his properties. I was there almost every day. It was riveting for me to watch, having gone through this and having, was writing the book at the time. And in that one, the fine, if it's upheld on appeal, could come in at more than $400 million. And that bill could come due in a matter of a year or two once it's gone through the court system. I think that one is going to be significant, and we don't know, and we don't know his exact financial situation, his exact cash situation right now, but he's going to have, I think anybody would imagine, trouble meeting it. He had trouble posting the bond that he needed to. And Russ and I have been seeing, in recent years, it's not something that's got a lot of headlines in the US, but he has been selling assets here and there. He sold a hotel, in a lease that he had on a hotel in Washington. It was losing a lot of money, and he sold that. He got some cash out of that. He's been selling other properties. There was a golf course he sold. He's been selling individual condominium units in some of the buildings he owns. But we're seeing pressure. He seems like he's doing things that may suggest financial pressure, but that fine, just that one alone is going to cause him a lot of problems.
And it may not be the only large fine that he might face in the near future, right?
Well, he's got that E. Jean Carroll file
Yeah.
too, that another trial that he went through, and that one, is $80-90 million. They're significant.
Absolutely. Trump supporters will, as they have a want to do, see this as a political book with political motivations. Is it?
I don't think so at all. Sue and I we don't usually cover politics, and our interest in this is really not the politics of it. We sort of skip the whole White House years. I think it's really an epic American tale of a particular family that started with, like most do here, with immigrants coming here, became rich based on government programs meant to cure some of the real ills of the 20th century, the Great Depression, World War II, both before and after, and then a battle for succession. And then Donald Trump's rise through as much sort of the smoke and mirrors of media and wealth as actual accomplishment. And I think it has a lot to say about how we in America sort of confer respectability and maybe even exceptionalism on people who appear to be wealthy. We tend to think if you're rich, you must be good at whatever you say you're good at. And Donald Trump has benefited from that, I think, more than anybody else in his lifetime. And really, it's had great consequences for our country.